Welcome everybody to the LSA. I can see many people entering the room. So I'm going to wait for 1 or 2 minutes just to make sure everybody who wants to be here is here before we get going. Let me just have a little look. Yeah, I can see we've got an audience, which is good to see. Good news. So I think, yeah, I can see one or two more coming in. So I will hold up fire for 1 more minute before I start introduce our speaker for today. Good. Okay. It's 3 minutes past 1, which means we should definitely get going. Everybody has their lunch in front of them and is tuning in. So welcome to the LSA Thursday Talk series. Welcome back to those who've seen this room before, and welcome to anybody who's just joining us for the first time. My name is Samantha Hardingham. I am the academic director at the LSA, and have the great pleasure of hosting Thursday Talks. Today, we are delighted to welcome back one of a pair of former students, alumni of the LSA, Alex and Alex. I use your abbreviated names, more commonly known as STUDIO8FOLD. Who just were part of our, initial pioneering cohort at the LSA back in 2017?
2015.
2015, of course you were. And then you graduated in 2017. So really proud and also pleased to have you here. Now in your 6th year of practice, so becoming, I'd say that's pretty firmly established. For those who don't know STUDIO8FOLD, as a practice, they fuse social and environmentally conscious projects with capital-driven components, spatializing an outcome that leverages the best attitudes of each. This talk will focus on one particular project, its societal impact and the visual language of materials and fabrication within. So its title, Fabricating a Visual Language, Who Controls the Outcome, is a clue to that project. I won't give too much away, only to say that it is work that Alex, Alexander Fries, co-founder today, is going to talk about, that fuses the practices work in education with Live Built project in an incredible location and with extraordinary with many hands. I'm not going, as I said, I'm not going to give too much away because there's lots to see, and absolutely fascinated to see how this project has come about and to learn a bit more about your practice. So over to you, Alex. Really good to see you here, and we will pick up questions at the end of the talk in about 40 minutes or so. So please make sure everybody you are thinking of questions, put them in the chat. Don't be shy, not a moment to be shy, and we'll come back. We'll join you back in the chat room. You will probably feel, Alex, a bit like you're in a black box, but you'll remember that time when we were all here. But we are all here, just to reassure you, and we're all listening intently. So don't be put off. Just remember that moment where we all had to do this all the time. Good. So over to you. Thanks so much for being here today.
Thank you. Thank you for the introduction, Sam. Also, thanks to Rose, Maria, and John, who are sort of behind the scenes that all make this happen. Yeah, so I'm Alexander Fraser, and I'm been asked to talk about, I guess the initial briefing was about visual language and the fabrication thereof, and we sort of turned it into a question about, who controls the outcome of this visual language, which we'll sort of dive into and look into a couple of the projects related to that. But just to give a little expansion on STUDIO8FOLD, because we sort of are still, even though it's established, we feel still quite young at heart. So Alex and I, who Sam mentioned, we go way back, having studied in Cape Town together, and then reconnected at the LSA, which was, fundamental to us as a practice, really embedding ourselves in London, getting ourselves, amazing network through the LSA, which sort of was a key factor in us being able to establish our practice. And then, yeah, so last year, November, we celebrated our fifth birthday. This is the sort of team with some of our fellows, who are sort of our mentors. And yeah, so this is generally the team, the key cornerstones really also, Mika, Clara, and Martha, keeping Alex and I in check. And then, our collaborators who we work with regularly, and our fellows who we seek advice every now and then. And I think upon reflection, Alex and I had a discussion at that, prior to that fifth birthday around, what eightfold is. And I just want to pick up on essentially seven points. They're not necessarily 7 steps, but 7 points that bring us to the 8th one, which is this idea of the eightfold, of going beyond the expected. It has to do with this myth around being able to only fold a piece of paper 7 times, which then was sort of busted because they made the piece of paper almost, a kilometer long. And it's sort of that thinking when it comes to problem solving, designing, that we wanted to follow. So our 7 sort of parts of the eightfold philosophy, the first one being engage, which has to do with engaging with the world around you, the people around you, the things that are happening. And I guess, for us as South Africans, it also means being involved there if we can, and doing more than just running a business, essentially. The other one is listening. Fundamental to every design brief we take on, we run a workshop. We do it with post notes and pens, and doesn't matter who you are, or if you're the CEO of a big company or just wanting an extension, we run this workshop and we unpack the brief and really try to listen to understand what's the driver here. Curiosity, perhaps best reflected in the sort of the myriad of projects that we take on. On the right, it's a site for a smart recycling center where we got shortlisted second place together with Architekturbüro Lindstedt for a smart recycling center that was going to mine the landfill for its resources. So I mean, from that to an exhibition in Brompton Road around waste and changing just one habit. Then chaos, which is a bit of a funny one, is for us, it's the Day of Bravery, which is something we do every few months or weeks, when we have the chance, and we sort of put our computers away and sort of allow the freedom of using your hands, making models, drawing. We put on overalls to really sort of get out of character, out of the day-to-day character, and allow a bit of chaos to creep into the design process in the everyday. Bold, this can either be a bold idea or design, which goes beyond what the brief is asking for, which was, for instance, what we did in the Cara Leroux Women's House competition, or being bold and challenging your client to not go with the standard material, to invest in something that is going to benefit them in terms of energy efficiency or the types of materials they use. And on the right, it was quite funny. It was in one photo we had foam glass, porotherm, and compact foam, which maybe means a lot more to people in the building industry, but it's a very high performing bit of build work, and it takes work. You have to be bold and you have to challenge your clients to get them to get on board with these ideas. And then partners, which I mentioned before, being a part of the LSA, the network, the people you work with, it's everything. We're based in a studio in Dalston with Tate & Co, who are fantastic mentors to us. We work with them as well, and do design reviews together. It's a really great relationship as well with Architektur Lindstedt. And ultimately is to create. So Alex and I, we set out to have a studio that was not just theoretical, that would take part in the world. I guess also backing off the LSA's story there, which was to sort of marry these academic and these sort of more theoretical ideas with the real world and see what can be done. And whether that's a residential project in London or a design and build creche in South Africa, it's all about doing and learning. So fabricating a visual language and who controls the outcome. I guess from that perspective, I first wanted to ask the question about what is control. When we say the outcome, that can either be what it means or its physical nature. So there's two types of control. One in ending up what it looks like, and then I guess the sort of a John Berger way of saying is the ways of seeing of what does it mean to you, what do you see in it, sort of a secondary layer to this visual control, which maybe you don't have control over. And then the physical part of how it's designed, the process behind it, how it's actually made, but then also how it's used. So what does it look like? What does it mean? The process, designing or building, and how it's used and inhabited. So to perhaps better explain what I mean, there's just a few sort of scenarios, everyday situations or things we've had before. So this was our first project in London, Casterbridge, where maybe some of you would see this exposed concrete ceiling as something quite beautiful and modern. That's at least how we saw it. But when some of the finishing subcontractors came to do the kitchen, one of them pulled Alex to the side and said, listen, the project's nearly finished, but you haven't done the ceiling. What's with that, And there was it was a thing of visual control where you can't control how someone is going to perceive what you've done that you deem to be good. That's just the nature of the game when it comes to architecture. People are going to love it, people are going to hate it, people are not going to understand it. So you've got to let go of some of that control and just have your own convictions. The other one is actually you need to have an education around this visual control. So something relating to the creche, which I'll get to in a bit. A lot of the students who work with at the University of Nottingham, I'll explain more about that later, is sort of Googling African patterns and then thinking, great, I'm just going to integrate that into my design. That's a big no-no, right? For instance, the Ndebele house, it has a very sophisticated tradition of painting and communicating through the patterns and colors of each house. It means something else. Or the mud cloth, which has a history around warding off evil and being worn in battle. So it's being aware of these finer things when you are communicating visually in various contexts. Then there's the physical control. I love, these are two photos I took. I mean, the one's just in Stockwell here in London. And I just find it very entertaining where, clearly someone's thought, all right, well, we need to stop people from racing down here. And they've put up these barriers, but, people obviously just go around them. And that's the force of human nature. If there's a shortcut across the path, just because you've laid one, in a nice tile, doesn't mean they're going to walk it. They're going to walk the shortcut. You need to, you need to be aware of these forces. And the other one is just a totally uncontrolled environment where it was just near a bus station. And there was just this guy with his lemon gelato, and people were coming by on their Vespers and sort of using it as a drive-through gelato station. That's not something I'd be amazed if someone could design that to happen. And then, sorry, just going back. Then on a totally different scale from an urban design perspective, this was work we did in Cape Town we're still with the University of Nottingham, University of Cape Town, a study on Dunoon, which is a township. And on the left, you can see this very sort of fine-grained dots. That's what the government built as social housing, as RDP, as it's called in South Africa. And 10 years later, so there's a figure ground diagram, you can see how that's more than doubled in terms of people who are actually occupying this land because of the access to infrastructure, which obviously through this density is totally overloaded. So again, that's designing for one thing, but not understanding what other elements you need to control. So fabricating the visual language, who controls the outcome? I guess the big question, is it really us? Is it really us as architects and designers? And maybe we can chat about that a bit later. But I guess from a design process perspective, just wanted to sort of illustrate, this is a project we did, which was just an in-house study of designing arches or volumes, but by molding the void, which we thought was an interesting thing, and one of these Day of Bravery moments, going back to sort of chaos, I guess, but trying to be less controlled or inviting in the unexpected by simply molding the void as a solid, which perhaps is going very architectural here, but it's a slightly unusual way of approaching it in that sense. At least it was for us. And then just pouring the plaster over it and seeing what the outcome was, which was quite beautiful and quite surprising in some ways. Which did actually, it was sort of a reflective study also on a project which we did, which I'll chat about in a minute, where the model on the left sort of illustrates this stone facade, this column, sort of series of columns that we were arches that we were designing, and it brings us, I guess, from the design process of what do you control, where do you release control, into getting to the built environment. And this is a project in North London, Muswell Hill. On the left, just the design planning and the photograph of the original building. And then this is, I guess, an important element. You know, in architecture, you take the site, you come up with your design, and then you've got to produce the drawings, and your drawings are a source of control, of controlling this visual language. And that might be through detailed drawings or through visualizations. In this instance, this process of controlling the build had to do with the fact that we were working with experts, right? Fabricators who make the stone, which I guess allows you a level of high control. So if we look at the visualization and the fabrication drawings from Ilam Stone, who fabricated the stone, and then you look to the final product, it's pretty close to what you intended. So this is a scenario where the visual, I guess, the visual language or the visual aesthetic, the actual fabrication of it, the design part of the process was perhaps uncontrolled and more free. But then to deliver on that, you need high control, and that's through drawings, obviously communication, and plenty of time on site. It's not meant to look easy. If it is, it's definitely not. And then something else that I wanted to touch on, just going back to South Africa, was on this design process. So that process was more about the form, the shape, and then delivering on that through fabrication. Whereas this was a project we did together with Red Deer, also a studio based in London. It's in Africa. This is Africa Burn, where they have sort of creative pavilions. It's sort of like the Burning Man festival, but in South Africa. And we had this idea, a friend of ours who did the skate park in Hout Bay, Ayetu skate park. Amazing project, very close to an informal settlement where all the kids who were, didn't really have a space to go to, they're all becoming, I mean, they're amazing skaters. We thought about this pavilion as, let's design with the end of it in mind, because it's a temporary structure. How do we make it have a life beyond just a folly that's just enjoyed at this festival, but how can we use it as a mechanism and control what happens at the end of it. And essentially what we did is we just designed this pavilion completely out of skateboards, which seems quite simplistic, but we were very close to actually being able to raise the money for it, but unfortunately COVID sort of tipped it over, and we haven't been able to revisit it. But this was an interesting one where you control the life cycle. You know, its visual language is entirely dictated by the fact that it's not about actually what it looks like, it's about what it's doing at the end of the project. So I hope some of the 7 points that we talked through, and this sort of talking about the visual language and how you control it and fabrication and so on, all of these lessons sort of culminate and come together in different ways when it comes to working on this design and build creche. So the relationship, essentially, just to explain quickly, is we as a studio work together with the University of Nottingham, where we tutor the second-year course together with Pete Russell and Mike Hawkins. Pete Russell sort of runs the whole thing. He's the magic man that makes it all happen in a way. But the university has a long-standing relationship with the Monang Trust. They are an NPO based in Limpopo who do early childhood development courses so that people there or the teachers become registered educators. So this is where it is in South Africa. So it's the northeast part of it. This is what it looks like. It's incredibly beautiful. It's the temperatures go from very low to very high throughout the day. The routes there are quite rural. This is what the car looks like at the start of the project. This is what it looks like towards the end of the project. And this here, as you might know, some of you might know, is not the project that we did this year. This is last year's project. And this is to learn about the things we couldn't control. So we went back there and had a walk around. This was a photo from the opening day last year. And there were just, there are several lessons learned, but just two to point out is we had on the right-hand side, you can see there's maybe like a little gap there. A door handle, which was just a round doorknob, had been replaced with a lever handle. Now that's believed because if you're holding a small child or you're carrying something, you can use your elbow to open up the door to get in. And this very simple lesson for us was immediately telling of, that's something else we need to integrate into the next year's project. And the other one was that there were paper signs stuck up everywhere, which we then actually just took chalkboards and made little boards and put them everywhere so that they could make their own signs. So the Monang Creche, which is run by someone called Rose Molepo. So the area is called Ga Molepo. Rose first started teaching in her parents' garage. In fact, that's where she was teaching up until now, and was limited to 20 kids that she could teach, even though there were more in the area. And the site itself is about 40 kilometers from Polokwane. There are about 4,000 people that live in the area. So there's a number of kids that are in the area, and this creche does now allow for Rose to be able to take on many more kids. And I just wanted to say this now. I mean, I'm veering a bit of the control thing, but this project it unlocks a lot more than just being an educational center. There's a little video I'm hoping to play, so I won't dive into too much of that. But yeah, it's much more of a building, much more than just a building. But to get there, the students at the University of Nottingham, they get put into groups, and each of these groups come up with a design, and the design gets narrowed down to sort of three projects that are viable in terms of cost and time, and also are the best designs, essentially. And that gets put forward to the Monang Trust. And then Rose, together with Peter from the Monang Trust, they then select which one of these 3 creches they would like to have built. And then, so it's quite incredible. The students, it first starts off with a bunch of lectures and presentations about South Africa, and the sun comes from the other side, and how does one even go about designing a building? I mean, they're only in 2nd year, so there's a lot of tutoring and so on, but it's an incredible sort of task for them to design something that's going to be built and that they're going to build themselves. There's about 50 of these students, and they come in 2 phases. So the whole build happens across 7 weeks, which is very rapid. I wish we could deliver buildings at that speed here in London. But yeah, then these designs from the students, they get taken, we take it in-house, and we just sort of rejig a bit of the design, because they sort of have to continue with other coursework. We check that it's sort of also hit certain standards, and dive into a couple of the details. Now, what I wanted to mention at this point is that when it comes to the visual language and what you control, the converse of this build compared to the project I showed earlier with the arches, where you had a professional fabricator making this off-site and bringing it there, is that you're working with students who have 0 site experience and a couple of tutors who have site experience, and Pete, who's a professional carpenter, but he's only one man trying to, make sure everything's happening correctly and in the right order. Is that you kind of need to design for the fact that there's a minimal requirement of control on site, that it's quite straightforward. Nothing that you are making or designing is too complicated for students to be involved in. Of course, there is the groundworks, which gets done by a subcontractor prior to getting to site, and the roofing also done by professionals. But the rest of the build work, from the stud walls to the doors to the flooring, to the shelves, to the kitchen, food prep area, all gets done by the students together with some of the staff. So it's an interesting exercise in you want to do certain things in the design, but it keeps you quite strict in terms of not overcomplicating for the sake of it, but you've got a totally different design task as such, because you have less control at the build. And there's obviously many things that change as you're going. So the control, to some extent, gets handed to problem solving there and then. So yeah, this was nearing the end. This was, I think, with about 2 weeks to go on site, or about a week to go. But before that, there's a hell of a lot that goes into it in terms of building up a whole site office, constantly having to charge the drills. There's a container which starts off very neat and gets a bit messy towards the end, but that's where everyone sends someone if they say, where can I find this? And off to the container. But that container is what moves from site to site. So every year, the University of Nottingham, with the Tusenang Trust, they build a creche. So it's one a year. There's about 100 creches on Tusenang's list. So there's plenty of work needed there. This is, you can see the students getting involved here. It's hands-on, it's carrying, it's drilling, it's hard work. 6:30 a.m. is breakfast. You get back when the sun goes down. That's Pete on the left. Here they're busy getting all the timbers ready for finishing up on the stud walls. And here you can see some more photos of I think almost in this photo it looks like the one's learning and the other one's showing them, which is a lot of how these things happen. You learn it, you do it, and then you teach someone. And there's some proof. There's Alex. So we actually managed to do a bit of fundraising at STUDIO8FOLD this year and raise some funds for some solar panels, which was an interesting one. Our intention was, it'd be great to have some lighting there, but the most exciting part was that there was a USB port on the inverter, which meant that the teachers could charge their phones. South Africa's got a very big electricity problem, but I won't get into that now. And there's also just generally, you know, a lack of infrastructure in the area. So it was a really good move, and a water tank, which is fantastic. And so this is sort of the last, I mean, touching back onto the control and like how, you know, the physical control of use, you know, how this creche might get used, of course, for teaching, but there's a number of different activities and you know, a totally different role this might play in the community as well. This is a photo on the opening day. Love that the kids are front and center there, because that is literally that as soon as the kids arrive, the building comes to life, because that's what this is all about. And there was it was a very long ceremony, a lot of talks. You know, the whole community is, you know, I think there were over 110, 120 people on the opening day there. This is Rose holding her keys. They're just a sort of the official key handover. And that's Peter. He's from the Monang Trust, who helps run that, together with someone called Terry. And yeah, I think, you know, and then we had so Alex's mum works in publishing, and she had a connection to an author, and we had the author come around and she did a reading to the kids, and, you know, a whole bunch of books we donated. And yeah, it's sort of, I don't know, just saying it back for a second here, from of course it's all architecture, it's all building, but this is at the end what it really is all about. So I think I'll leave it there, and I think I've just about got enough time to play a short video about the creche. I won't lie, I'm quite chuffed. I had to sort of manage my time, and I think I've just about managed. I hope I didn't speak too quickly. I hope someone will flag if this is not showing. Is it showing? Can you see the start of the video?
You're doing great. We can see it.
Okay, I'm gonna hit play. It's moving.
Yes.
It's just been amazing to see how like the building has grown, and like see everyone like bond together in the space of like 3 weeks. Some of these people, we were strangers at first, but now they're like really good friends of mine, and I think we'll stay good friends for the rest of it.
So we're here for the students to engage with responsible architecture, responsible social impact, and understanding all of the nuances of charity work and how that can happen.
Having a project chosen is really exciting. You know, it's not really something that you would think would happen.
The students usually work in pairs or small groups to produce this set of designs. Goes to the architecture practice at a big kind of public event. They select 3, and then our students actually spend another 4 or 5 weeks just designing detail work at, you know, 1 to 5, 1-to-1 drawings, trying to understand how the building goes together. And then by about February, early February, we have the architect's drawings and the project selected. In late March, right around to coincide with the students' Easter break, we come down, and over 6 weeks, we build the thing from the ground up.
Nna Rose Molepo, ke bereka ka bana ba banyane ba creche. Creche ya ka e thomile ka 2001, ke le ka mogare ga garage. Space se la re yang go sona se tlo re thusa go kry-a bana ba bantsi ka re ka mo ka nako ya COVID ile ba re kalla space ba re tshwanetse re be le bana ba ba 20.
We look at ECD centers that have the need. Firstly, the ECD center is in operation, but they don't have the facilities to operate from. They either operate from a shack or they operate in open spaces. We submit about 3 to 4 names to the university. The final one is decided by the university. They always consult with us if that is okay.
It just makes me feel quite honored to be able to build something for for a community as well. Like as a student in architecture, it's very rare that you get an opportunity to actually be able to build one of your creations
it's a proud moment because it's like they're going to use this building and we've designed it. It's crazy. Yeah.
Really like rewarding, because it's one thing when you're just like making models in the studio, but then when you actually go to build something that's going to be used by people, it really reminds you like what architecture is all about and why people do what they do, and it's really fulfilling. Yeah,
it is about making things. It's about constructing things. It's not just designing them, but making them real. It's really important. Everything we do must have an impact not only in ourselves, but in your surrounding community, in the context surrounding you.
We got to meet the teacher that was involved with the project and to see what they were working from previously and what we were able to create for them within such short period of time.
Ditoro tsa rena ke gore re kgone go developa bana. Ke fe bana skill se ba nthutileng sona, so ke tshwanetse go ruta bana. Ke ba develop bana ba tsebe gore eng ke eng. Ke yona ke na le kgatlhego ya gore ke a itse gore ke tlo ba le bana jwale.
And I guess the hopes and aspirations is that we don't only do one a year, and it's not just a creche. This is the start of something. And I think over the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years, there's a real appetite to make it much bigger, much stronger.
So I think something that's quite phenomenal about these creches is that it's not just the building and facilities, the fact that the creche has now a building that sort of signifies that it is an institution for education, which just becomes a catalyst, but it speaks to a much bigger thing of creating these spaces, which just unlocks a whole lot more than just the classrooms for teaching.
They have a space, they have a place where they can be stimulated, they have a place where they can learn. Study after study would confirm the importance of early learning, early stimulation. The lives of those children are changed for good forever. You also have other community activities beginning to take place at the center. The community now has a place that they can trust. They have a place that they can be excited about. If you look at it, it's just a building, but to us, it's a whole different ballgame.
The students come to the project for so many different reasons and from different starting points, but nobody who does the project ever forgets it, right? It's one of those things that just sticks with them. It's because people trust us to do something beneficial. It's not just ECD, not just early childhood development. It's the empowerment of women, the empowerment of parents, allowing parents to re-enter the workforce, government subsidies coming into these communities once these schools are registered.
An opportunity like this doesn't come around very often for a lot of people. So I think if this could expand into something bigger, what the impact we could have on communities, not just in South Africa, but globally.
Hoping for going forward that we go to these communities where there is no service for children. You build this facility, suddenly there is a place and the service just flourishes. So we would be hoping that more and more of these rural communities can get these facilities, which then open access for them.
You do to shaga. Can we improve alone? You're not going to improve.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, that was, have they played okay?
Thank you so much, Alex. Yeah, we did. I had, yeah, I mean, there was some a bit of lip syncing, but we absolutely got we definitely got the vibe. I was there, or certainly wishing I was there too, which is an amazing project. Thank you so much, Alex, for your really interesting talk. And to all of those who have featured in the film and been part of this project. I've got quite a lot of questions in the chat room, which is fantastic. So I will stop. We've got about 20 minutes left of lunchtime so I want to dive straight into those questions as quickly as possible. I have just a couple which are really sort of observations really rather than, and maybe they lead to questions, let's see. But I think you're just to bring things back to your kind of connection with the LSA for a moment, and how the practice has grown out of that experience of your master's experience, and the kind of building of that essentially manifesto, your eightfold philosophy, and the points that you took us through, which I think are just really inspiring and so fantastically useful as a kind of grounding for, you know, approaching the world. And anybody, any client, you know, this is who we are and this is how we do things, is an incredibly useful tool, I would imagine. And I just think, you know, things like the Day of Bravery is really truly inspirational and inspired. And I wonder where those have come from. Is there a direct connection with your, you know, the work you did, your manifestos and your manuals and some of the things you did at the LSA? Was that sort of well formed at that point, or did that come later, do you think?
We definitely did revisit our manifestos. I think, you know, maybe a year or two in, we definitely went through it again. I think there was also there were several things going on. You know, when Alex and I started the practice, we understood, I think, you know, how to draw things and how to had an imaginary idea of how to run a practice, but that was really sort of learning by doing at a very fast pace. And I would say that the first 2 years were really hard in trying to figure out how you do these things. And it was sort of at that point where we revisited our manifestos. I definitely think that having to write one when we were at the LSA made us think critically around what do we want to be as a studio? What do we want to be doing? Who are we? You know, we don't just wander around and build things, you know, but actually have sort of a drive or a sense of how we want. First off was, I guess, the emphasis around how you design, so the design process. So I would say the Day of Bravery definitely came out of us thinking, right, we've been sitting here at these computers for weeks now, and we're actually a bit stuck in this design. Why don't we just shut down the computers, print off some things and get out, you know, we've got all these model making materials which we hadn't touched in weeks, and we thought, you know, we kind of said, tomorrow we're not switching on the computers, we're just going to design and go a bit nuts, you know, in a way. And it was so refreshing that we thought we have to do this more regularly, and that had to do, and that was sort of at this 2 year point where we were like, well, you know, let's look, what did we write in our manifestos? And Tim Lindstad, who was also at the LSA, we were working a lot with him at the time as well, and we sort of looked at all three of ours and chatted about it, and then we started to really think, okay, we need to build in certain processes in our design, in our studio. So, you know, every week we have a design review, and that can be one project or two projects, but it's, you know, it's in everyone's calendar, and you've got to drop what you're doing, and we're just going to chat about this project. And then, you know, every 1 or 2 months, or sort of been 2 months more like it, we have a Day of Bravery where you don't, you know, as I say, you know, put away your computers and so on, and just think. You can even take a project you've already got an answer for, and just redo the brief. You know, how would you do this if you were to start again? Is what we did with one of our projects. And it was really interesting because it forces you to reflect on all the decisions you've already made about this design, and you can't change it now, but taking the time to sort of say, oh, if we could go back in time, what would we do and how would we approach it differently, enforces lessons on for the next project.
Yeah, really, really interesting. And I just, yeah, I think it's a really, I wondered whether there was were there other practices or people that had sort of inspired you in that way, or did it feel like this was coming out of all your own invention? Were there other people around you?
I would say so. So for one of the things, such as the workshop, which was around listening, was we have friends of ours in South Africa who started a practice called The Mark. And I remember years back being there, and they do this thing called Follies in the Veld, and they ran like a workshop. And it was the workshop though was designed around creating a brief. And it was just the way that they had used these post-it notes and sort of sketched things, and it was very fast paced and so on. That sort of triggered a thing in my head where I thought, you know, oh, why don't we do this with every project at the start, you know, for the brief. And Alex and I were like, yeah, this is just got to become a part of how we do things. I think this idea of stepping away and just drawing, or, you know, making something, you know, like reflecting my own experience, the design review thing, for instance. I used to work at Tate & Co. And they always had a weekly design review where everyone in the office would join, and there would be a big pin-up. And I thought, you know, that's a great bookend to have. And someone who's just been doing door schedules all week gets to sort of join in on a design discussion. And, you know, everyone has, you know, your designs are so much richer if you just bring in more brains to the table. So, you know, that definitely played a role. And
so that might sort of begin to answer one of the. I'm going to go to our questions because I'm conscious of time, and I want to make sure that our visitors in the room are definitely get some answers. So Esma, who is Esma Duggan, who is one of our first year students currently, is asking the fellows/mentors, how does this relationship work? And I guess referring to that extended team, I think.
Yes, so the fellows are Catherine, Till, and Tim, and so Tim is sort of he's a family friend. I know him actually through Alex. Till is actually family of mine, sort of, but we lived together in London for a while. He works in advertising. Tim used to work in publishing. He's retired. He's a businessman. And Catherine works at Systemic, which is a systems change company, helping companies transition from transition their normal business into environmentally sustainable businesses. And they are, we call them fellows because they're not a board. A board sounds too sort of formal. They're people who we gather around in a Zoom call, or, you know, if we can meet up with one of them in the area, then we'll chat about specific problems that we face as a practice. So whether it's, you know, we get sound advice around Tim, either through financial planning, or it is how you engage, a lot about how do you manage a client? How do you talk to them? What are they thinking when you're not around, kind of thing, you know, that kind of advice. Or Catherine, very much about, you know, who can you connect with, and how do you form an argument for something that is, you know, sounds expensive because it's sustainable, but actually it's not expensive, and, you know, there's a different way of going about it, and you should talk to this company or this person. Until is just, yeah, he's a creative mastermind, and I guess his way from advertising, you know, it's just interesting to sometimes see how they go about either pitching for projects, or, I mean, to a large extent is about how do you tackle a brief and how do you tell a story. You know, he's always about narrative. So, you know, we might talk to him about a specific project, but collectively the three of them will get them round, and it'll be talking about the direction of the studio. What have we been doing? They're also a good sounding board, being like, guys, this is a silly way to go about things. You're doing it wrong, you know.
They're your sort of professional equivalent of your external examiners, huh?
Yeah, exactly.
Critical friends in that sense.
They are.
Yeah,
They say it as it is. Yeah,
great. I'm going to go to Esma's other question. There's another one, and then we'll go back. But Esma also asked, would this model, and I guess referring to the Creche project, would this model of co-building be possible in the UK? And if yes, what criteria, regulation, certification is needed for it to be possible? E.g., what qualifications are needed on site to manage a project and group of people like this? That's quite a specific question, and I suspect quite a maybe a
So-
lengthy answer, but whether there's a
Yeah, so there was a project actually in Nottingham, which was done with RISE, which was also another sort of educational institution, that the design and build unit, in the year that they couldn't go to South Africa because of COVID, but things were slightly opening up, they built sort of this small facility. And it can get really complicated because I mean, even here, you know, the project in South Africa, it has to be built according to the South African building standards, SABS, and this is something that Tusenang Trust in that case helps manage. So I would say that if you are ever thinking of doing something like this, you should work with an organization that, you know, if you're coming in as the building entity, if you're doing that all from scratch, you got to be prepared to really understand how you get your permissions, how you get the land, you know, the project itself, how it's run. In terms of the skilled labor, there are obviously certain tasks. I mean, we obviously had engineers from the University of Nottingham who are also practicing engineers who did all the structural design, one of who is there on site for the first 2 weeks until all the structure's done, so that is all calculated and signed off. But so you gotta just because it's a project that's, you know, like, because it's a, you know, a project where it's sort of an outreach, you know, you're helping and doing this out of your own time and so on, doesn't mean you can like cut corners on it. You got to do it properly, which is actually a massive philosophy of what Pete's been driving with this design and build, is, you know, have it something that's tight and very buildable so we can do the best, you know, the highest quality we can. I don't know if that really answered your question.
I'm so sorry, but my internet just completely cut out and I got kicked out of Zoom. So I've just come back.
Well,
so I missed that, but
we've recorded the talk, Esma, so you can hear Alex's response back, but I suspect it's also a chat at some point because there's a lot in there. But thank you. I think it touched on it. Kyra Cousins asks, how do you approach creating the drawings for a complex handcrafted model? And I'm guessing sort of referring to that Day of Bravery process, and then taking those sort of early models onto the next phase of I guess, you know, construction, fabrication drawings.
How we transfer the model into actually a drawing. I mean, I guess, am I sounding it right?
I think it's, yeah. So how do you approach creating the drawings for a complex handcrafted model?
Okay, so I mean the model itself, you know, I guess it is complex, and you have the model. I mean, you could, in theory, you could 3D scan it and then put it into a 3D model, which would be the if you have all that tech at hand, it'd be easier. But I think we take it more as a cue, you know, like, okay, this is what we're achieving, and then you start drawing it. You either, you know, sort of, you have to overlay that model onto the real site, and you've got to start understanding how does it work in terms of proportions across the whole facade that actually then, you know, ends up being built, you know, next to an existing building.
So do you draw, do you essentially sort of turn it into a digital model of its physical self and then put that into
exactly exactly, and then we take those drawings and we share that with the fabricators. So the drawing that I had in my slide, that was the drawing. So they then do those drawings and they send those drawings back to us and they say, this is how we're going to make it, are you happy with it? And then you've got to check everything.
That's that really nice bit of, I mean, as you say, there are lots of ways you might do it depending on the technology you have to hand, or you sit and measure and there are a number of ways, but that's interesting. You just take it straight into a digital realm. And Elliot Ritchie asks, this is our last question from the audience. How do you manage the risk of specifying bold, non-standard materials in what seems such a rigid industry and ensuring the contractors have the skill and knowledge required to implement it? So again, I think, tell me if I'm wrong, Elliot, but that you're referring to the Creche project and how, yeah.
Oh, I understood it as it's referring to the slide that was bold about challenging clients and the material, which was around the compact firm glass and the pyrotherm. Yes. So that the trickiest one of that was actually the compact foam, just specifically on that project, just because building it all comes down to the approved inspector signing off on the work. So in a way of having it signed off, obviously you've got to have a contractor who is open to it. So I guess in that one was a bit of hand holding in the sense that we work quite closely with the contractor. He said, I'd never built with pyrotherm before, but you send the fabric, the manufacturers will send you all the details of how it's meant to be installed. You go through it together. In that case, pyrotherm is very much like block work. It's just done with a slightly different tool. So there are enough examples of how it could be, how it needs to be installed, and a lot of contractors are used to having to install things, and it's there's specific instructions, but it's not going to be rocket science. It's just about following it quite carefully. But then the second step is having building control. On the compact firm, it was quite a lot of back and forth with them. We had to then get the supplier so you've then got to communicate with the supplier who makes it, to send through their proofs or their testings that they've had to do against flammability, moisture resistance, all those kind of things, for then the approved inspector to vet those tests, especially if you're working with, for instance, a material that's not from the UK and things are slightly different. It's a bit of work, but then once you've done it, you can be like, oh no, but we installed it and they approved it on this project. So you get the same approved inspector for the next project, and then your life's a lot easier. So
yeah, yes, you got to just get it done once, and then you've got a platform.
Then you've got a leg to stand on.
Yeah.
But you've also got to have the right client, right? So I mean, it was a client who was like, hey, yeah, I'm up for, let's do something more sustainable. So, but you've got to have those conversations right from the beginning, right when you first start designing. You can't, otherwise if you add it on the end, it's so easy to cut it off. But if you bring it into the project from the ground up, then, it's not a discussion to have. It's just how do we do it?
Yeah. That's fantastic. Thank you so much, Alex. I mean, I just think, but there's a lot to talk about. We've touched a little bit on quite a few projects now, and we're still looking at this amazing view, which is just lifts the spirits, I have to say. I think the whole question around how you handle and how you think about and how you clearly demonstrate through your practice this idea of being comfortable with control, looseness and control, and the moments in design process where you know when you need to just loosen up and open up, ventilate the brain is what I always try to say, and then know the moment where you've got to be careful and precise and take care, and that the role of the architect has to be able to span that really wide spectrum, and then to be able to make other people feel comfortable that that's possible. And the role of what you've sort of highlighted today is that the importance of the role of drawing in all of that. And the drawing is the moment of that sort of communication where you have to know, no, you've got to pay attention to this. And designing out ambiguity in a way, which is really fascinating. So I thanks so much. I hate to tell you, but it's 2:00.
Yeah.
I mean, everyone's finished their lunch and they've got to go back to work. So you have changed our lives and views forever, like the children here. And I dare say all of those students that build these projects, I want to know what you're going to do next. So we'll invite you back.
Amazing. Thank you very much.
So thanks so much. Thanks to all of our guests today. Thank you from the LSA to visit Thursday Talks. Next week is our final talk with Foster for this year, for this academic year, I should say, with Foster and Partners, who are going to talk about decarbonising the urban realm, a fairly modest task, I would say. So look forward to joining you all then. And in the meantime, please do all visit the LSA Summer Show, which opens on Saturday, is open at the Hackney Depot for a week. We look forward to seeing you all there, and sign up for the Design Charrette, which is the LSA equivalent of a day of bravery. So you can come and work with Be First for a day and have an amazing time and ventilate your brain. So look forward to seeing you all there, and thank you, Alex, and Studio 8FOLD. See you soon.
Thank you very much. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.